Take heart, my friend, we'll go together this uncertain road that lies ahead, our faithful God.
Welcome to Take Heart, where we are exploring current human experiences that either display or call for biblical truth. Today I have with me a brother that I've been delighted to meet, John Beyerle. John Beyerle is a war veteran in Vietnam. Mostly you were in the Air Force. You flew the cargo C-130, and then you also flew the bomber, the B-52. And you've had unbelievable experiences, some amazing, others tragedy. And so I'd like to hear about all that. And if you don't mind, John, welcome again and thank you for helping to participating in this conversation that we're going to have. So I'd like for you, if you don't mind, start with your war experiences, maybe starting there.
Well, I graduated from pilot training from Selma, Alabama, and my first combat duties was in a C-130 as an aircraft commander. And I was stationed at Langley Air Force Base in Virginia.
Wow.
And then the unit moved to Mactan Island in the Philippines, where we flew rotational missions into Vietnam, mostly delivering munitions, personnel, equipment throughout Vietnam. And I participated in airdrops into that. And so I did a tour out of Mactan for a year.
When you say airdrops, what were you dropping?
We were dropping anything from supplies. When we went in and out of Quezon, I was dropping mostly munitions, and if we did land, we would come around land and pick up medevacs and personnel, injured personnel, and fly them back either to Saigon or to Da Nang to get medical treatment, and then flown to the Philippines for further hospitalization. So
wow. And I forgot to mention, you flew the C-130, the B-52, but you also flew the Air Force One afterwards.
Yes, I flew the Air Force One for Johnson. I was stationed at Bergstrom Air Force Base here in Texas.
Well, before we go there, go back to your war experiences. You were a cargo plane.
Okay, so I did a lot of missions. I have about 900 hours of combat time in the C-130 with 2.5 tours there. After my Mactan Island assignment, I was reassigned to Dyess Air Force Base, Texas, M130s.
Well, when you were back then doing those deliveries, those drops, you ever shot at?
Yes, we were shot at many times, and we had hits and holes in the airplane. And in one mission, we had gone in with armed reconnaissance in front of us, and they would strafe the area. Then we would go in and do an airdrop, or what they call a low-altitude parachute extraction. You went in, and 5 feet above the ground, with the rear door open, a parachute would open and pull the load out. Then you would just keep right on going, close up the door, and climb. As we came in after the F-100 strafed the area, there were enemy gunners on the side of the runway, took up and just started shooting at us. The problem was we were low and at drop airspeed, so we were sit and duck. We picked up about 65 small arms rounds through the airplane. One came in the cockpit, hit the radar, right, and imploded, and it was quite noisy. And we were able, but in order to not get shot down, we just pulled up into the clouds. And I can remember calling and asking where the 100s were so I don't run into them. But once we were out of visual from the ground in the clouds, we cleaned up. We noticed, I think it was the left wing was pouring fuel out of a couple holes in the wing. And so we bypassed fuel out of that tank into the main tank so it wouldn't run dry. and we went back into Cameron Bay and landed and left the airplane and grabbed another airplane to Nha Trang where we were working out of and spent the night there.
Goodness. I remember seeing a picture where you're on the runway
That was
ready to take off, but something was happening.
okay. During the siege of Khe Sanh, we were resupplying the Marines there, and every time we would land or there would start a mortar attack on the runway. So you didn't shut down, and you just, what they use, a high-speed taxi, turn off the runway, open the doors, and push the loads out. And then if anybody was getting on board, they would jump on the back of the airplane. And I got one of my loadmasters jump out and took a picture, and there's pictures of R-130 and mortars going off about 5 feet in front of us. So
Jeez.
it's amazing that we lived through those things. But I've got about, in the C-130, a little over 2,000 sorties in country.
Wow.
So I had 2 full tours, and then I did a 6 month.
Because you had come home.
Yes,
and
I
then
came
you
home,
were
and I
here.
was home for about 60 days, and then we
Got redeployed.
redeployed. And one deployment was to Japan, which we flew out of Japan into country for 15 days in and 2 days off. We'd go back and get our clothes washed and get a decent meal, and then go back in country and would stand. One of the reasons they did that is Congress had limited the number of personnel that could be in Vietnam. So if you were assigned to like Mactan Island in the Philippines, or Clark Air Force Base in the Philippines, or Tachikawa, Japan, you didn't count. So you didn't go into the count because you weren't permanently assigned.
My.
So almost all the airlift that was done in Vietnam, taking forces and munitions and cargo and fuel and food, were flown out of units that were in Taiwan, Philippines, and Japan. But you didn't count as the number of soldiers assigned.
Wow.
So we all just rotated. And we used to say, you were assigned to the Philippines for 12 months, but you only spent 24 days there. So it was mostly in country. And my second tour was when I was stationed at Dyess in Abilene, Texas, and we rotated into Nha Trang and into Cameron Bay, which were in country. And flew there for about 800 or 900 hours in that 2
Also
years.
cargo.
There was a program that the Air Force did called the TAC Exchange Program. And that was a Tactical Air Command, which the C-130s at that time were assigned. And the B-52s were Strategic Air Command. And so they took what they call below the zone majors, and they swapped assignments for 6 of us. And I went from the C-130 to the B-52.
Wow.
And was stationed in upstate New York. I finished my training in the B-52, and 4 days later, the unit moved us to Guam. So in the first 4.5 or 5 years of my military career, I spent 3 of it in Vietnam. And
part of it once
C-130s,
and part of it was B-52.
B-52s, and we flew out of Guam. I flew the B-52G model out of out of Guam out of country. Most of our missions in the B-52 at that initially were in South Vietnam, looking for transport on the ground, munition storages, enemy units.
So it's more like a reconnaissance?
Well, no, actually dropping.
Really?
We dropped
in South Vietnam.
South Vietnam. Most of the missions were South Vietnam. The G model carried 51 750-pound bombs. To give you an idea, One B-52 raid with 3 airplanes dropped as much munitions in one mission as was dropped on the Schleif out of the B-17s in Europe on a month.
Wow.
So we dug a lot of holes, and we used to say we were lake making because with the torrential rains in South Vietnam, they would fill up with water. But then we would also intersperse with northern attacks because there would be bombing halts in the north called by President, and then they would expire and we would start going north and have to clear out the targets that we had struck before. So I did about 91 missions in a B-52 in Vietnam. To give some idea, I have 1,159 hours of combat time in Vietnam. So that was a lot of time in the air. And as you said, a lot of times getting shot at. And lucky enough not to be shot down, but definitely got some holes. You get, I hate to say this, but you get used to it, you know.
Amazing.
But,
Amazing. So once you finished, you took off some time off, or what happened right afterwards?
Well,
which, by the way, did you feel a major difference psychologically right after, or was it just continued?
Continued. The thing is, you know, the mission of the Air Force is a lot different than you would say the Army on the ground. You're not, you know, you're in the B-52 case, 30,000 feet above where the thing is. So you're disassociated with personal on personal. You're not shooting in close range to another human being. So you're a little bit detached. So the emotional strain isn't quite as bad as some of the Army people that have gotten PTSD from it. But on one mission in the 130, we were flying and we had a loadmaster. His name was Irving Schwartz, and I can still remember him. He called and said, "Hurry up, slow down, we have a bomb back here." Apparently some of the Vietnamese personnel we picked up weren't just for Vietnamese, they were Vietnamese, Cong, Viet Cong, and they had hung some thermite grenades armed and hung them on the seats in the back.
Oh my.
And they, basically a kamikaze. And we immediately just pulled the throttles back to idle and just opened that door, didn't care what airspeed it was. And Schwartz threw it out, and as they went out and exploded, they took a portion of the rear elevator off the back, and we were able to land. So, I always say, God's hand was around us, but we didn't know it. And so that was sort of exciting. It made our days.
At the moment, you're just like, oh, that happened, but nothing conscious of God.
No, it was like later you sit back and say, if he hadn't found it probably in 10 minutes, it would have blown the back of the airplane off. So that's sort of an experience in the C-130. And I flew C-130B models out of MACTAN and C-130E models out of Nha Trang and Cam Bay from Dias.
Goodness. So after both the C-130 and the B-52, things settled down for you? Were still going, or you retired?
When I got back out of the 130 assignment at Dias, I was transferred to Bergstrom Air Force Base in Texas. And since I had over 3,000 hours, almost 4,000 hours of C-130 time, the time Johnson was flying the 707 to Bergstrom in Austin, Texas, but the 707 could not land in the ranch because the runway was too short.
The ranch, meaning the Johnson
Ranch. And so the Air Force would fly the 707 to Bergstrom, and they had a converted Convair, which is an Air Force equivalent of a C-131, and it was converted for presidential support. And it was my job with three other pilots to pick him up and fly him to the ranch when after he landed at Bergstrom, or go to the ranch, pick him up, take him to Bergstrom to pick up the 707s. We also did take him on short trips around Texas, New Mexico, Arizona area. So I ended up being an Air Force One pilot for Johnson prior to my B-52. So it was in the middle of that. And at the time I was single, so it was a great assignment. You find out you have no crew day. It's not like, well, I'm done for the day. If he got up and got there at 7 in the morning and wanted to go somewhere at 9 o'clock at night, you just slept on the airplane, waited for him to come, start him up, and take him where he wanted to go.
Now, if I remember correctly, you have one
one
particular story that I'd like to hear for our audience to hear.
Well,
apparently it involved a storm of some kind.
Okay. One day we got a call. I got a call. I lived in the bachelor officers' quarters. I got a call about 10:30 in the morning and said the president's going to be landing about 11:30, 12 o'clock, and wants to, go to the ranch. And so I got into my Blues, which we flew in with when the president was on board, and went down to base operations to file a flight plan and do all the walk through the airplane, make sure everything is spotless and perfect for the president. So then I went into base operations, weathered, and they said, "You're not going to get in the ranch today." I said, "What do you mean?" He said, "There's Texas thunderstorms all around Lampasas and around the ranch, and you're not going to get in." And he said, "In fact, you're probably not going to be able to fly the helicopters that we had at our disposal."
That intense were the storms.
And icing. Yeah, in the clouds. So when the 707 landed, I went out to the president and saluted him and, "Sir," I said, "President, we're not going to be able to fly you to the ranch. You're going to have to take the motorcade." And he had a nickname for me, and it was Little John. And if I stood up, you'd see that's appropriate. And he said, "Well, would you try?" And I guess you don't tell the president, "No, I'm not going to try." So we loaded up the entourage, which included Lady Bird and her entourage, and we cranked up and took off. And we were bouncing around in these thunderstorms, trying to find a way through. In fact, I had the seatbelt sign on, and it wouldn't stay on autopilot, which is what we normally did because it was smoother than hand flying, but it wouldn't stay engaged. It would constantly pop off. So I'm hand flying this airplane, trying to find a way, bouncing so bad. I get a tap on my shoulder, and it's Lady Bird. And she said to me, "Who got the toilet paper?" Now, the first thing through my mind is, "Oh my God, they're sick back there." And, and wait a minute. I said, I'm thinking, I went through the walk around with the steward and everything is back there. And I said, "Well, I am, ma'am." She said, "Well, it's blue and it's pink and it should be blue." And not thinking, I said, "Well, it beats using your hands." And that was the wrong thing to tell the president's wife. And that sort of ended my 89th assignment. The next day, an airplane came in from Washington, flew me to Andrews Air Force Base.
And you got chewed out.
I got chewed out.
Oh.
And the nicest thing is the director of operations of the 89th I had flown with in C-130s. So he yelled at me, told me, that how I had ruined the reputation of the 89th and everything. And he told me to stand at attention, and I did, and I saluted him, and he goes, "That'll be all." And I turned around, and as I got to the door handle of the ops office, he said, "Wish I had enough guts to tell that SOB off." and I knew I was no longer in the 89th, but I wasn't in trouble. In fact, that's when I got assigned to the B-52s. I was part of that exchange program. And I was assigned to Griffiths Air Force Base in upstate New York as a B-52 aircraft commander. And went to Castle Air Force Base in California, qualified in the B-52, and then went back to Griffiths to fly localization and familiarization with the G model, because the school was an F model, which was slightly different. And then for reward of passing the check ride in the G, they put you on alert. And people will tell you, how long were you in SAC? And I'll tell them 3 years. And they said, how many days you sit on alert? And I said, 2. They said, what? 2 days into the alert, this program called Bullet Shot was the deployment of the G models to Guam to intensify the bombing of Vietnam. And I was in that group. So we went, took off from Griffiths, refueled twice over the Pacific, and landed at Guam. That's the first time I ever took a full load of fuel on, was that mission. A little nervous because, you did a wet contact in training, but never taken full load. And if anybody's familiar, in the B-52, it gets heavier as you put fuel on. And the 135 that's refueling you is getting lighter. So he starts going faster. So you have to keeping up. But if he tries to slow down, you start an accordion effect and you lose contact. And so it's a little different. But we got our fuel and we landed at Guam. I guess it was 20 hours later. So it was not a 20-hour mission on an augment crew. It was hard to stand up. Everybody looks at that big airplane. There's no stand-up room in that. It's 2 tiers. There's an upstairs and a downstairs. And we flew every other day. We would fly mostly in South Vietnam, but then we started bombing after the bombing halt in North Vietnam.
Wow. And
I had quite the experience in getting up just south of Haiphong. We hit some targets along a rail yard, not the main rail yard, but a railroad maintenance facility outside of Haiphong Harbor.
And during this time, I've got to ask, your relationship with God was, you knew, but you didn't have a strong or
I didn't have a personal relationship with Christ. But I had grown up in a Christian home, and I had gone to church and Sunday school, but I never personally accepted Christ into my heart. It was like you had a head knowledge of God, but not a heart knowledge of God. And then in my college years, I drifted away. It was too much trouble to get up Sunday and go to church. And
I have to say, I had pretty much the same experience. I knew of God, but he was so far out there. He's God. You don't even get close to him. You have no relationship with him.
Right. And one of the problems I think I experienced is I knew of God, I heard of God, but I didn't study about him, didn't really get a relationship. It was like, you're right, he's God, he's out there, he created the world, and then that's it. It ended sort of there. And there was a heaven and a hell. And if you went to church, you went to heaven. But that's not what it's all about.
Right. Right now, after all the sorties, B-52s and all that, you had gone and did go through some major tragedies. Let me hear about that.
Well, I was married when I went through college, and so as an engineer, I had gone to Rutgers for undergraduate, and the Air Force sent me to MIT for a master's. So I have a master's in high velocity thermodynamics, which I never used. And
from MIT.
Yeah, but all I really wanted to do is I had a great interest in airplanes. When I was a child in Newark, New Jersey, I would walk down to watch the airplanes fly. So having an opportunity to go to pilot training from ROTC was my desire. And once I started flying, I really loved it, so I kept it. But when I returned from my tour at Dias, I came back in and I noticed that I was not getting letters from home.
Mm.
They sort of stopped. Mm. And my wife requested the divorce, and she said, I married an engineer. I didn't marry a pilot that was never home. Mm. And you know, I was a little bitter, but she was right.
But by this time, you had a child or two?
I had 2 children. Yeah, I had a 7-year-old and a 4-year-old. And
that was from both of you, married to her.
Yeah, right. And but in the first, 5 years of our marriage, but the 3 years that we were married in the Air Force, I was only home 4 months out of 3 years.
Ooh.
And so you could see the rationale behind it. Although it hurt, you come to understand that was it. So my time, the rest of the time in 130s and my time in Air Force One at Bergstrom, I was single. And so that was a tragic thing because I really did love my children, and it's hard when you don't even live in the same area, to maintain a relationship at 200 miles away with your children. So that was tragic. And then
so at this point you were in your late 20s?
Yeah. 27, 28.
Okay.
Yeah. And then
for a young man, wow. I mean, it's tough. That's really tough.
So when I was at Bergstrom, my co-pilot from Dias had gotten married, and in somewhere, wherever, in Texas, northern Texas, and he was having a welcome back introduce his new wife to all his old buddies. So he called me up and asked if I would come to this, like, I don't know, reception, but after reception, it was, like
after party.
The after party. And so I said yes. And he goes, why don't you bring a date? I said, I don't know anybody. At the time I was dating, actually, one of the secretaries that worked for Johnson in the library, but it was just whenever I could, not a serious relationship. So he said, well, my wife's roommate from college, why don't you have a date? She's really nice. So my buddy and I went and rented an airplane, and we decided I was going to drive out and pick her up, but I had been out too late the night before. So I called up Marguerite and I said, well, I can't, can you get to Love Field? And she said, yeah, I live about a mile from there.
Dallas,
yeah.
Mm-hmm.
And I said, well, we're going to fly and pick you up. And I have some crazy buddies. So his friend, Joe Darlack, he decides, he gets a white shirt on, puts a bow tie on, and a pair of black pants, and we fly this Mooney. And he was a navigator and wanting to fly, so I was giving him instructions. So we land at Love Field, and they taxied us right up to the main gate. And I have no idea what this girl looks like other than she has long blonde hair. So anyway, we get in the terminal, and I see this blonde beauty come through this door with long blonde hair and a suitcase. And I walked up and I said, are you Marguerite? Yes. And Joe says, well, I'm his private pilot. Can I take your bag? A little bit ostentatious. And so we get in that airplane, and we're going to fly back to Abilene. At that time, I'm living in Austin. She lives in Dallas, and we're going to have this meeting in Abilene. So we fly to Abilene. It's late in the afternoon. It's raining like crazy. I get out of the seat, go back to talk to this girl, at least introduce myself. And I know all of a sudden I get this, like this to the cockpit. So I walk in and Joe says, I don't know what's wrong with the airplane. He says, but we keep losing altitude and I got it full throttle. So I turn on the icing lights and the wings are coated with ice. And I said, oh. So I said, we either climb and it wouldn't climb, or we descend and hope to melt it off. So we got down to about, maybe 150 feet over Route 80, and all of a sudden the ice starts coming off. And so we rented this airplane from a little tiny strip. So this is another one of the where God's got his hand on you. Mm. And we couldn't get in there because it was closed for ice. So we landed at Abilene Municipal. Another buddy of mine picks us up in our car, and we go to the party. And then the next day, I pick up Marguerite, and I drive her back to Dallas because, to get her home in my car. And I drive all the way down to Austin, only to find out we're flying back up to Dallas for an inspection of the Dallas Air National Guard.
Oh my goodness.
So that was my day, but Marguerite had no idea why I got out and kissed the ground. It was like, thank God. But I didn't really thank God. It was like, skill and cunning. But so there's another example. And
amazing.
Probably the most pressing example was out of North Vietnam. We had a mission into North Vietnam, a flight of 3. I was number 2 in the formation, and the airplane in front of us was hit with a SAM, and pieces of his left wing came back as FOD, or foreign object damage, and took out the 4 engines on my right hand side. And got fire lights on them because they were stalling, and some of the blades had been taken off the compressor. So we shut them down so it wouldn't burn the wing. And once you lose 50% of your power, you have to descend to maintain airspeed and get to a lower altitude. So, and the sequence in North Vietnam was, if you got hit, get out over the bay, get what they call feet wet, get over the bay or the water, because the Navy had picket
Boats.
ships that would pick you up. You try not to eject over the land where you could, especially north, where you're going to end up as a POW. So I yelled to my navigator, or radar navigator, hey, Jay, his name was Jay Abels, Jay, give me a heading, feet wet. There's a pause, and then my navigator, the other guy was radar navigator, which would have been a bombardier years ago. He was Jay Abels. The navigator says, Jay can't hear you. He's out of his seat. He's on the aisle here praying. And I thought, okay, but never crossed my mind. Well, we got that airplane out over the water about 2,500 feet, and it would fly. And I could maintain wings level, but I couldn't climb, but I wasn't descending anymore. And I had full throttles on
the engines
4 and 5, 5 and 6 and 7 and 8. I had full power, but I couldn't maintain. It would start lifting the wing. So I pulled back the outboards a little bit, and I fly. And I thought, well, how am I going to descend and not tip? So I started playing with what they call the spoilers, which were like
Flaps on the back.
boards that came up that would, put more drag on the airplane. And I could get a nice 500-foot a minute descent with just a few things. And it wouldn't roll. So I said, let's set up. And so Jay and we set up a square to pretend we were going to downwind, base leg, and final and see if we could fly a pattern, and we could. So we immediately diverted towards Thailand to land. At the same time, when you have an emergency, you usually call in. Well, we got a Boeing guy on the front, was on force at the Air Force numbered, and he said, well, you can't do that. You're going to have to eject. And I thought, after 2,500 missions in Vietnam, I'm not jumping out and trying to swim and, in the Gulf of Tonkin. And I said, it's flying. Well, and he goes, no, you need to do it. I said, I had a few words of 4-letter to them. Leave me alone, basically. The airplane flies. We're going to go to Thailand. So we did. We landed, immediately shut down the engines, just sort of taxied off the runway, and couldn't wait to get to the club to have a beer or two, So, so another
incident where God was there, but you weren't
I
seeing
had
it.
never, I would say, skill and cunning, but it wasn't. But it stuck with me. About 4 years later, after out of the B-52s, I was up in Griffiths and as a engineer, finally got caught. We started to go to a Pentecostal church, and I finally walked forward and accepted Jesus Christ as my Savior. And the first person I called was Jay Abels.
The one that was praying.
And this is hard. He said, I knew you would accept Jesus. And I said, how did you know? He said, because I've been praying for you every day since. And that was like 3.5 years.
Wow.
So pray for others. And to this day, I could see God now, and then later in life, my son, who lived in Texas, worked as a construction, had a lot of problems with drugs and alcohol. And when he was about 33, I guess he was working in on an old Sears and Roebuck thing, turning it into a warehouse, and fell off of a scaffold and was killed. But he wasn't found for 2 days.
Oh, my.
And so I lost my first son. But I know that he had accepted Jesus in his life. In fact, that was... So the beauty is once you know where you're going to go, you also know who's going to be there with you.
So you have both emotions at the same time, tremendous pain of the loss, but also hope.
Yeah.
That an assurance that you're going to see him again, your son again.
Yes.
You're going to be with him.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's something that's very hard for people that don't know God to understand.
I don't know how they could get through it without God.
Yeah, I know. As I've shared with you, I lost a daughter, and she was just a little short of 28, and I can attest to the same thing. The pain is horrendous, but at the same time, there's this assurance that we're going to be with her, because she too had realized that, she was a sinner deserving of judgment, but her trust was in Jesus, that he died for her.
I've been blessed since I accepted Christ. I have 4 other children from, Marguerite and I had 4 children. And
So you had 2 with your first wife, and
marriage.
then 4 with...
yeah, and then we adopted 2. So we went through 8 kids through our house. That's why the gray hair and bald spot. But,
I understand that completely.
But my 4 children and one of the girl that we adopted are strong Christians. And I think the experience that God gave me, and then the forgiveness and the relationship with God, has rubbed off on those children. So parents, your life, really, and how you respond to God really affects your children.
I like to come back to that, because you had mentioned this sometime in one of our conversations, that it's not so much what happens to us, it's how we respond to what happens to us. But I also remember you mentioning that your first wife also took her life.
Yeah. In fact, my son that went had ups and downs in his life, but he always depended on God. But the thing that got him back into drugs and alcohol was my ex-wife had gone through many marriages and finally found another person that she got saved, accepted Jesus. In fact, she went over on mission trips and helped in India with Mother Teresa, worked with her.
Right.
So, but her husband of about 12 years died of cancer. And she just really not got over that. I finally found somebody that shares my love of God and gives me, a relationship, and I lost them. And she shot herself, and my son lived in an apartment in their house and found her, and that just tore him apart. And so when he fell off the scaffold, we don't know if he was high or if he got shocked and knocked off, but he fell about 35 feet. So,
wow, what tremendous!
So
loss.
it was a loss. Parents shouldn't have to bury their children.
That's right.
And so there's been tragedy, but there's been rewards. Living a Christian life makes life so much easier.
I like to hear, how was it that you did come to Christ? What?
Well, actually, I had a 1960. Still have a 1964 Jaguar, and there was this group of people, young people, my wife and I's age at the time, like 31, 32, that there was a lady down the street that said, "Why don't you come to a Bible study?" We thought, I don't know if I got time for that, but we did. And this group found, in fact, we had a school teacher that did the Bible study, and one of the other fellas had a real interest in automobiles, and he said after we would have the Bible study, he actually came to work on a Jaguar, and we got this old Jag going again. And out of that Bible class, 2 pastors and 2 Sunday school teachers out of that. The fellow that worked with me on the Jaguar became a Assembly of God pastor, ordained pastor in a church. And so we moved to Virginia from the B-52s, and I worked at the headquarters of the Tactical Air Command. And we decided we would try to go to a church, and we ended up in a Pentecostal Holiness Church, and that's when I found God. The pastor said, he gave a very good altar call. He said, if you don't know Christ as your personal Savior, come forward. And I knew what he meant. So I went forward, and God just blessed me. All of a sudden, my heart just felt total relief. And so when we went back to New York, I got assigned as an engineer at Air Force Research Lab. In fact, the detailer said, we sent this guy to get his master's in engineering, and all he does is fly airplanes. It's like, what are we doing? So they decided to give me an assignment as an engineer, and they were just beginning to build a brand new church, an Assembly of God church, and the pastor and I just really clicked, and he kept me close, and I started reading the Bible, studying the Bible, and through the work of Dwayne Wilbur, that school teacher that was outstanding Bible teacher, Christ was active in my life. So,
and since then, it's been a consistent desire of yours to learn more of the scriptures.
Yeah, in
to
fact,
tell other people.
Right. In fact, as I said, Marguerite, my wife of 53 years, when we met, we were not active Christians, but now she's taught Sunday school the last 10 years, and I'm the lay leader of my church, and it's just wonderful. I know where I'm going. I don't want to get there right away, but I know where I'll be, and I'll know who I'll be with, and I have Christ in my heart.
Amen. It's been such a delight to get to know you, John. And I wanna mention, how is it that you and I connected? And it was at a funeral. I mean, your friend John Fura was
I had a friend for
my wife's
50 years, and your wife was his adopted daughter.
Yep.
And as I said, we did things together, and through that Assembly of God church, we both, John found Christ, and we would have great discussions about it. And so when you came to the funeral, I knew Nancy, your wife,
right?
Because my kids used to swim at the Fura pool, which is the only place in Oneida that we knew had a pool. So we knew Nancy and Sherry and Louie.
Yeah.
And so John and I really got to know each other, and he found God, and I know I'll see him again.
And again, to me, it's just so seeing God at work, even through death. John's funeral is the way I got to meet you, and it's such an enrichment of my life to get to know you. So through a funeral, this is what God can do. And
if you notice, the funeral was more a celebration of his life. And and when I first met him, he was a different person than when he went to meet the Lord, and you could see that transition, and I'm pretty sure people that knew me when could see that transition too. Sometimes it's instantaneous, sometimes it takes us a while.
Yes. Yeah, so now I want to ask you, seeing and hearing of the tragedies you went through, how God had his hand on you all this time, even though you weren't like connecting it. Afterwards, you look back and you say, man, God was kept me all this time, whether it's the engines dying or being shot at or all these different experiences. Now, what is your passion? What is the years you've got left, so to speak? What would you say is your passion?
Well, I'm blessed with 4 Christian young women and girls and grandkids, and to see them accept Christ is going to be important, and I try to make sure they understand that. I'm involved in a group called Welcome Home Vets. I'm on the board of and we've had over 21,000 veterans sign our Book of Honor. And so I donate a lot of my time and effort, but I also am their the American Legion. I'm their not pastor, but their chaplain.
Mentor or
Chaplain. So I'm trying to use the experience of what God has given me to give to others.
Encourage others in the faith.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I'm active in my church, and probably spend half my time at Welcome Home Vets, I work with Purple Heart Homes, helping to make houses for ambulatory veterans, widening the door frames and building cabinets that are high enough to get your things under. So I try to use my gifts that God has gave me for his work.
Well, John, what a delight, and again, how enrichment I get from you, from your life, from your walk with God, from your love for Jesus. And I just look forward to see what God is going to continue to do with you. And I suspect that maybe we'll have another conversation.
Okay.
Thank you so much.
Well, as I said to you earlier, when I sing Amazing Grace, when it says how many spoils and snares I have already come, I look back at Vietnam. I mean, I was in a hotel that they blew out the first 4 floors, and I lived on the 6th, and I was there. Why did God save me? Because he has a purpose.
And I would dare say that part of that purpose is to encourage me. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
We love you.
Love you, brother.
Take heart, my friend, we'll go together this uncertain road that lies ahead.